Welcome to Spy Chat from the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education there. Thank you so much for joining us. We have two incredible speakers today. We have my boss, Chris Costa, the Executive Director of the Spy Museum, and we're joined by an honorary board member of the museum, Doug Wise, who is a former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. They're each going to present for about 10 minutes on the hottest topics that they are tracking and maybe give us something to read if you still remember how to read a book and you're not just all on screen. I cannot thank enough our sponsor for today, Bodhi Aviation. It's really thanks to support like this that we're able to do programs that are free. So thank you very much, Bodhi Aviation. Now I'm going to turn it over to the people that you are here to hear from. Hi, Chris.
Hey, good afternoon, Amanda. It is terrific to be here today, and I am at the Spy Museum, so we're reopened, so come and join us. A couple points right up front. I really want to thank John Bodhi personally. Again, John is a friend and he's a sponsor for this program, but for Bodhi Aviation. Secondly, I also want to note that Doug is a longtime friend and really a mentor. So this is in particular a special privilege for me today. I wish I was with him in Arizona, but it's a wonderful day here in DC. So let me dive in. And the first article I want to talk about, this is a light article. I don't usually start off with a light article, but the article I want to talk about, it was reported in the New York Times. It was about CIA's recruiting strategy to build their spy force, if you will, for lack of a better term, their staff employees, their ops folks, as well as their analysts. So CIA took to TV for the first time, and that's what New York Times reported on. They took to streaming services like TV's Hulu, and it really is a take on some observations that John Brennan made circa 2015 when he recognized that CIA needed to do probably a better job on recruiting a more diverse population. So if you watch the show that's been running on Hulu, you'll note that it is a sharp Homeland. For those of you who watch Homeland, it's very sharp, it's quick, it's slick, and it's definitely focused on not just analysts, but also operations officers. You even will see a brush pass, a pretty good brush pass, I might add. So I think it's really important that CIA is redoubling their efforts to focus on diversity in their ranks, as well as just taking their advertising to TV. The second article we'll probably talk about in greater detail, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but what's getting a lot of legs is the idea that Russia has been paying bounties, in quotes, to Afghans for killing Americans, for killing also NATO allies. There's been some reporting that Czechs were killed, some Americans were killed, and some of this reporting has been unsubstantiated. Some of it seems to not enjoy consensus across the intelligence community, but clearly the questions have been raised. What is the administration doing about it? What is the veracity of that reporting? Is it credible? Certainly the storyline is credible that the Russians would go to surrogates to conduct some kind of actions against U.S. forces on the ground. So we can talk more about that in greater detail in some of our analysis. And I want to also note that Doug wrote an excellent Washington Post with some of his former colleagues, a Washington Post op-ed that gets to some of these points as well. So the next story, changing gears, I want to focus on counterintelligence and disinformation. We've talked about Huawei, the telecommunications giant out of China. What's interesting is a Huawei employee, actually the CFO, flew into Vancouver. She was picked up some time ago by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. RCMP picked her up because the United States has an extradition agreement with the government of Canada, our friends in the north. The Canadian government picked her up for being suspect of violating Iranian sanctions and bank fraud. The bottom line is extradition proceedings have been playing out for some time, but there's a tit for tat going on between China and Canada now. Clearly, China is unhappy. So there have been 2 Canadians that have been held for some time, over 500 days in Canada. Both of them, in my view, are not intelligence officers. They just got caught up in geopolitics. Both of these Canadians are going to go to trial for espionage. So a significant escalation in this tit for tat. The next article I want to talk about, we've spoke about Russian disinformation. So there's a different campaign that was just revealed by Ellen Nakashima in a nice article in Washington Post. In my view, it took you to a report by Graphica, a research company for a lack of a better term. They call it the research secondary infection. That's how they name this dynamic, where there's a parallel campaign. We have all heard about disinformation in anticipation of the 2020 elections, but there's a parallel campaign that has really played out on over 300 social media sites, blogs, fake posts, forgeries. Go to the site, read the article. It's fascinating. And this is all playing out in parallel to the disinformation that we've talked about on previous spy chats. It just gives a sense to the audience of what is happening regarding disinformation and how deep and significant these operations are. We don't know, by the way, according to media reporting, we don't know who's actually executing these disinformation operations specifically, other than the fact that these are Russian-sponsored disinformation activities. In other words, we don't know if it's the Internet Research Agency. It might be a separate organization under the rubric of Russia. The next article, to completely change things up a little bit, really focuses on neo-Nazis. Interesting transition, right? But it's the enemy within. It's the idea that there's a German military organization called KSK, German Army Special Forces. They have identified that there are some neo-Nazis among its ranks or former German KSK operators that were stealing from maybe arms rooms, equipment, but they had neo-Nazi and far extremist propaganda. That is, obviously a problem in Germany, and the German government wants to get a handle on that. It's an alarming report. The Germans have literally shut down one of the companies in that elite. I believe it's a battalion formation, but it's a significant concern from a counterintelligence standpoint, and certainly it's something that we'll watch going forward. And it'll play it into another story we'll talk about in a moment on neo-Nazis with a twist. The other story I want to talk about, another insider threat, if you will. We've talked about the 21-year-old Air Force officer, the Saudi Air Force officer that came to the United States to train in Pensacola. He was radicalized and shot three sailors. Tragically, that played out in Pensacola. What it revealed is that this individual, though he was vetted, presumably by the Saudi government, presumably by our State Department and Department of Defense, there was a problem with vetting. That certainly is an understatement, because he had self-radicalized all the way up to the point of the execution. My understanding is he was communicating with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Some of the analysis of this suggested this is a new kind of threat dynamic. I would argue each radicalization is different, it's unique, it follows similar patterns. Yeah, this guy was not a card-carrying member of Al-Qaeda, but he certainly was inspired to act. He was not directed. It really underscores the importance of the Department of Defense doing significant vetting of foreign officers and foreign service members when they come to the United States to train here in the United States, part of the visa process. So I said I was going to talk about another story on Nazis. This is very bizarre. There's a idiosyncratic group out of the United Kingdom that's not only a neo-Nazi organization, but it is also satanic. A young private, I'm sad to say, in the United States Army, became enamored, arguably, with with what he read about this particular organization. He reached out to him at some point in time. He provided sensitive information on his unit, his military unit, U.S. Army military units movement in Europe, in the hopes that the neo-Nazis would pass information to jihadists and attack his colleagues, his fellow soldiers. It's a very, very bizarre and troubling story, but it really gets to the heart of insider threats. So we've kind of covered the waterfront from the Saudi to the neo-Nazi or the German with Nazi sympathies. Clearly a very, very disheartening story, but the German government clearly is going to get ahead of that in the future. The last two stories I want to focus on, I like to talk about hostages, as everyone knows. I also like to talk about wrongful detentions. A positive note on the German government, they have a third trial ongoing or getting ready to start on a Syrian that's suspected of committing war crimes, a refugee that was identified and suspect of crimes against humanity. I think this is really important because it's the third individual that's going to trial for committing war crimes. It really represents what the German government is trying to do. It also underscores that the United States isn't the only country challenged with doing appropriate vetting with refugees, with the visa process. And also somewhat related to detainee issues, in the last year, there have been, I want to make sure I get this right, there have been several hundred forced disappearances by the Venezuelan government, the Maduro government. We've talked about President Maduro, the fact that he is a narco-terrorist, that his objective was to cooperate with drug lords in Colombia and flood the United States with cocaine. He is wanted by the US government. At the same time, there's a vibrant opposition movement ongoing in Venezuela. And many people that are part of that opposition government continue to disappear, several hundred just this past year. So that's an important story we need to keep our eyes on. This is reminiscent of what happened in right-wing governments in the 1970s, like Chile and Argentina, I'm sorry. So it's not really a good harbinger of things to come in Venezuela. And then the last story, I will finish up briefly. It's also related to war crimes, not by design. It's just a fascinating story. And Doug might want to talk a little bit about this because of our shared experience working together in the Balkans. And it has to do with President Thaci from Kosovo. He was en route to the United States to have a brokered meeting at the White House with also the Serbian leadership to kind of work through some agreements, perhaps so Serbia will someday honor the sovereignty of Kosovo. And before he made that trip, Thaci found out that he was to be indicted for war crimes. And this is interesting because Thaci was a hero of Kosovo, a hero of the Kosovo Liberation Army. He subsequently became the president in Kosovo, and obviously he had to turn around. He has expressed his innocence. I happened to meet him last year and have a brief interaction with him. This is an interesting development. It's not a Serbian war criminal in this case. It's an alleged Kosovar war criminal, and he happens to be the head of Kosovo. So this is something to keep our eyes on. There was going to be a rapprochement in theory between Serbia and Kosovo. We'll see how this plays out. So those are the stories that maybe I can answer more questions about. Before we go to Doug, I want to offer what I'm reading right now. I've read actually two books recently. One is MBS, a book on Mohammed bin Salman. I think it's worth understanding dynamics that are ongoing in play in Saudi Arabia. And I actually appreciated of what I read by Ben Hubbard. I believe he's a journalist. And I think it's my due diligence to read the book that was just published by John Bolton, and I did complete that book. It answered some questions I had in my mind. I'll let the audience determine whether it's worth buying it or not. But those are the articles and those are the books that I've read of late. So I'll turn it over to Doug. I'm anxious to hear from him.
Chris, can you see me?
I can see you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, and greetings to you and Amanda and all who have dialed in. Greetings from the land of enchantment here in New Mexico. We live in the mountains in the central part of New Mexico, and certainly are very pleased to be able to join you today from here virtually. A couple things in my 10 minutes, and I'll keep it less than 10 minutes. I suppose I'm at risk because every speaker says that, but I promise to finish on the same day that I begin. I'm very privileged to be part, as you said, of the International Spy Museum family. It is a really a special privilege to be able to be part of this remarkable institution. I'm also honored today to be on the panel with you and Amanda on Spycast, because I know you've had a long series of distinguished guests who have been on, many of whom have far more experience than I do. I want to offer a very special thanks and appreciation to the Maltz family. Their generosity and vision truly knows no bounds. And from a very personal standpoint, having his vision and his generosity create an institution as distinguished as the International Spy Museum, to shed light, to bring education to adults and to children, to showcase the challenges, the courage, the heroics, some of the successes and some of the failures of the community, and also to highlight what I think is an important aspect of the U.S. intelligence community is our partnership with our foreign allies as well. It's certainly an honor to be here with the International Spy Museum leadership team, and really it's a great opportunity for me to express my appreciation to them, because during this very difficult time, keeping the institution alive and well, getting it back in business, to be able to attract people who want to come to Washington, D.C. and see the museum, I think is an important thing. So really a tip of the hat to your leadership team, Chris. You and that team have done a remarkable job. You mentioned John Bodie. Let me mention him as well. Bodie Aviation, our sponsor today. Bodie Aviation, located here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, is what I call a special operations aviation company. At its core, Bodie Aviation is a piece of patriotic America. Every employee and every part of the leadership team of Bodie is committed to service above self. And quite frankly, they're all about rapidly adaptive ISR, and they serve a number of customers, many of whom cannot be mentioned in the open press, but they provide aviation services to national security community in many forms, whether that's the soft community, whether that's local, state, or national law enforcement, fire suppression, fire response communities. They do charter flights for sure. They provide maintenance, and like the Spy Museum, they provide aviation education. And I want to say also, before I get into some more substantive remarks, a thanks to those who have taken the time today to join us, to try to learn a bit, to contribute. We can learn from them as well by their questions. And whether they're in the United States or whether they're around the world, we really appreciate the international nature of the International Spy Museum family for sure. And I want to say thanks to the museum as a whole for hosting me today, giving me an opportunity to answer some of your questions. My career, if you go look me up, I was the deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency for 2 years, coming in right at the time that Mike Flynn was leaving. But ahead of that time, I spent nearly 3 decades undercover with the Central Intelligence Agency. My career has been defined pure and simple by being able to do extraordinary things in extraordinary places, and most importantly, with some absolutely extraordinary women and men. The reality is, in the intelligence business, it's not the authorities or the money which make it so amazing and so remarkable. It's really the magicians who make the IC magic. That's what makes the intelligence community of the United States so powerful. It's the talent and the women and men who have volunteered to come in and give service above self, to sacrifice for themselves and their families on behalf of the American people in the United States of America and our foreign allies as well. The strength of the IC is exactly what I just said. The strength of the IC devolves purely and simply from the core values and its integrity, speaking truth to power. In spite of what the environment might have you believe, the professionalism, the integrity, the courage within the intelligence community leadership and followership is second to none. The community is powerful because of its unity, its collaboration, and as I said, it's about the magicians. It's the application of the diverse skills, talents, experiences, and diversity of the workforce of the US intelligence community. And I can also say with our foreign intelligence partners as well. Our foreign partners, I can't say enough of thank you on behalf of my community and my colleagues. I can't provide any details. I can't speak in anything other than platitudes and generalities, but I think that's sufficient. Our foreign partners share the challenges. Perhaps more significantly, they share the risks that we do to make our collective nations safer and to make our people safer and to preserve freedom and the ability to live our lives in the way we want to live them. The United States intelligence community could not do what it does for the American people as well as it does without the able assistance of our foreign partners. I really want to just conclude by saying I want to make a call to Americans, and I imagine that the 250, 300 people who may have joined us today are probably part of the choir that I'm preaching to. But I think it's important that in today's climate, which is quite negative from an information content standpoint, that it's still honorable and noble, and it's still critical and important for young women and men of America to heed the call of public service, whether it's in the intelligence community, whether it's in the Department of State or the broader national security community, or federal law enforcement, Department of Education. It is important that you pick a career that is service above self and where you can contribute and participate in something bigger than yourself. I think that's absolutely critical. Please let me conclude by making a personal comment and say thanks to Gina Haspel, the director of CIA, and her leadership team. The tremendous leadership and the tremendous response of her followership in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think says a lot about not only Gina and her leadership, but it says a lot about the workforce of CIA. And also let me extend that and say the workforce of the US intelligence community as well. Gina focused not only on serving the customer, the President of the United States, the National Security Council, the warfighter, and other customers, but she also paid priority attention to the CIA workforce that gives so much and sacrifices so much for her and for the American people. Her focus on her workforce is really what makes Gina Haspel highly successful. I can't say enough, and I serve with her, so I'm not without bias there. Chris, let me turn it back over to you and Amanda. I want to just say one final time, it's an honor and a privilege to share this panel with the national treasure like yourself. It's just really a special opportunity for me. Thank you very much.
We should conclude our show right there, right? I don't hear that very often. Thanks, Doug. No, that was great. We're ready for questions, Amanda. This is exciting.
Yeah, but I have to say, the next time I introduce you, Chris, I think you're going to be national treasure, Chris Costa. Just got to warn you of that. We got some great questions in here. One that I really liked is, do you think that the intelligence community, the intelligence field is right-sized now, or is it due for the questioner asked streamlining, and I might add, or beefing up? What are your thoughts?
Let me thank you. I think that's a great question, actually. Um, and I think it's important to be able to answer it. Speaking as a practitioner and as a former leader in the intelligence business, I will tell you, we don't have enough women and men to do the job that we have to do to defend the American people. We could always use more help and more assistance, more resources. Quite frankly, I was always very pleased that the oversight committees and the appropriation committees took excellent care of the intelligence community. They did such a great job, I thought. But the reality is the tasks are so broad, they're so complex, they're so existential that we need more talent into the US intelligence community. And it's not a matter of not having the positions available, it's having the women and men who are willing to step up, and as I said, to put service among self. Now, in terms of streamlining or maybe reducing, there's discussion to be had about the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And there is some discussion that the politicization perhaps at the director level, and that any attempt to do surgery on OD&I might be out of political necessity rather than out of practical necessity. But I think if you look at the creation documents for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, it was designed to be very lean and mean. And it was designed really so that the intelligence community could have a strong advocate from a policy and a budget standpoint, as well as to be able to set standards for all of the intelligence agency and to create the integration and collaboration that I think was obviously missing at the time of the 9/11 attacks, which was the predicate for OD&I. I still believe that the OD&I staff could probably deserve a little bit of shrinking, but not to do anything other than to send that talent back to the agencies that have so graciously given that talent to the Director of National Intelligence. So I think Mr. Ratcliffe and newly joined Neil Wiley, a national treasure in his own right. I think the team will be powerful. I think it'll be capable. I think they'll make the right decisions. But I do believe that from a staff standpoint, they could deserve a little bit of reduction. But quite frankly, we need more talent in the U.S. intelligence community. Heed the call of public service. Come and join and stand on our shoulders and be able to help and contribute to the safety and security of the American people. Chris, do you have some thoughts?
The only thing I'll add, that was great. I would just add that I talked about 10 different examples of things that I'm tracking just from last month, articles. And when you think about it, a lot of what I talked about cut across interagency lines. We talked about cases that the CIA would be tracking, DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. We talked about our foreign counterparts, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, not just from a law enforcement standpoint, but from a counterintelligence standpoint. So the stuff that we just talked about doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you have a healthy, well-resourced intelligence community that's always looking at itself to make adjustments as the situation changes. I'll just offer one commercial announcement that I want to make, and I've said publicly, and I've written about this, and that is we have to be careful on the idea of counterterrorism and terrorism, because we don't want the pendulum to swing so far that we say, hey, look, we haven't had a 9/11. We have to reapportion these intelligence resources in the United States to focus on foreign intelligence threats and things like understanding when another Wuhan, happens, or another pandemic, where its origins are from. Some of those things are intelligence community questions, but we have to be careful not to overcorrect and have a balanced intelligence community. So that's my caution, and I've said that in all other forums as well.
Yeah, Chris, you made an excellent point. It's having the right balance, between privacy and security and between the existential threats that the United States faces. Complex and numerous. You just outlined a number in your opening remarks, and that's just scratching the surface. But the reality is the American people expect us to really defend them against all of that and to respond against those that require a response. But it's getting the right balance, privacy, security, the right balance of talent against all of those threats.
I have to say we have some really intriguing new questions.
Hopefully they're easy ones. Hopefully we want the easy ones.
Well, no, I mean, but it's really interesting looking at the spy chats that we do every month. There's some really different ones, and so I'm trying to focus on those. Someone wants to know if you see new domains for intelligence gathering emerging, such as in the polar regions. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, well, I could answer it in the following way. The polar region is important to the Russian Federation. Okay, I suppose I could also argue that the polar region is certainly the climatic behavior of that particular part of the world, will be an indicator and possibly, a heads up on climate change of significant proportions. But I think from an intelligence standpoint, supporting that part of the federal and international governments that pay attention to climate change, I think it's important. But from a hardcore intelligence community standpoint, the Russians know that the way to the United States can possibly be from the north to the south. And that I think it's important that the United States of America, we pay attention to the polar region, as a community. Chris, what do you think?
So I don't have that much more to add. I'm not tracking a lot that's going on in the polar region, but to your point, clearly the Russians, that's part of their sphere of influence. They're testing us. I have some very, very close friends that have operated out of Alaska and have warned me that we should be paying attention to Russian activities as it relates to Alaska in particular, in that part of the world, and of course the polar region more generally. So I think it's something we have to watch. And candidly, I wanted to work this into the conversation where, and this is no pun intended, but we may be moving into a new Cold War. We've heard about the China century. I would disagree with this is going to be the Chinese century, but I think China is going to challenge the United States. But at the same time, Russia is too, and they're going to work the edges. They're going to challenge us in places like Afghanistan, which they may well be doing, and they're going to fill gaps and fill vacuums. So there's no doubt they'll take advantage of vacuums, and they'll take advantage of places that they see as opportunities. But that's a great question.
Since we're talking Russia, we had an early in the spy chat question about Russian interference, not in US elections, but in UK elections. I don't know if you have been following that or have any comment on that.
Well, I think from the previous national elections in the United Kingdom, the Russians were quite active. I mean, the Russians certainly consider us the main enemy. That's the term of art that they use when applied to us. But I think they consider the United Kingdom is, from a geopolitical standpoint, a distinction without a difference between the US and the UK. So I think they see having an unstable, politically unsecure, culturally and societally vulnerable United Kingdom is in the Russian Federation's best interest. Chris?
Right. I just think it's Cold War-esque, right? The Russians are going to try to undermine alliances. They're going to undermine the West. I mean, an example that I have, because I'm not tracking on UK in particular. So that's an excellent question. That's a point of departure from more research on my part. But I was studying Sweden. Of all places, Sweden, their elections were certainly tampered with, and maybe that's too strong of a word, but Russia was conducting activities clearly inimical to the interests of the Swedish population as it related to their elections a couple of years ago. So nobody is immune from tampering, from electoral interference, but certainly right now the target's on our back in 2020.
And I think, and I think, yeah, a great point. And I think what makes it, what Chris had to say, so important is the fact that the Russians don't have to be in the country who's the target in order for them to have an effect on the geopolitical situation in that nation. They can sit in St. Petersburg and through the Internet Research Agency reach out and touch deeply into the United States of America. And they can do exactly the same with other American allies all over the world who happen to be adversaries of the Russian Federation. And they can use the same tools to ensure that the political outcomes are politically favorable to the Russian Federation. They no longer have to recruit a guy to write an article, to put it in the newspaper and make sure it gets published. They can do that from the Russian homeland.
So this is an interesting question. I haven't heard about the reference that the person makes to breaking news that the Russian state allegedly hacked COVID-19 vaccine research and asking, is medical research espionage an emerging threat? I, of course, have to mention that we feature some medical research hacking in the Spy Museum in our espionage spying in the marketplace. So it is not new, but do you have any comment on, in particular, vaccine hacking?
Well, I do have a couple thoughts, but perhaps maybe since you mentioned the museum, maybe Chris can respond first.
I would just say, generally, we know that the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and other actors, they're going to look for competitive advantages. So they're going to turn their community on a dime to steal our technology, to steal our research. The Chinese are doing that across the board in the United States. The espionage threat coming from China is significant, stealing research data in particular. And so I just think this is Russia, China, they will continue to make those kinds of requirements priorities. So it is consistent with what we expect Russia to do. They're going to steal the research. It's a whole lot cheaper for them to steal it. I did see the article only briefly, so I can't comment on it much more substantially than that, but it's not at all surprising. And China will do the same thing. And as I said, other actors will too, like Iran. Doug?
Yeah, if the media reporting is correct, it's not just the U.S. national security community that has been reporting on that, but it's also our international allies as well. I can't add much to what Chris had to say. It's well within the bag of tricks for the Russian Federation. They have unimaginable capabilities, and they have no rules, and they have no ethical boundaries. And this is all about advantaging the Russian Federation and about disadvantaging everybody else. Because as we said in the article, win-win for Putin is you lose. And that's just what it's all about. I think there's also a dimension that is in addition to thievery, it's what happens if the Russians alter the data. What happens if they get the real data, provide it to their medical, scientific, and development community, but they leave behind altered data, which our researchers would use to base their own scientific conclusions and their own engineering pharmaceutical development efforts. So it's a double-edged sword. We lose competitive advantage, as Chris said, and we may in fact get false data in return.
Scary. So Chris, you mentioned the neo-Nazi threats, and one of our attendees wanted to know if there has been seen any collaboration between US neo-Nazis and European neo-Nazi groups.
Yeah, generally, yes. And that's a terrific question. I've mentioned this on previous spy chats. An organization, Russian Imperial Movement, is based out of Russia. And at the same time, they have white supremacist and Nazi sympathies, and they've been labeled a terrorist organization. That's a first in our long counterterrorism history. And I am happy to say that the 2018 counterterrorism strategy wrote neo-Nazis and white supremacists into the guiding document for the interagency. So that means if there is collaboration, and as I indicated, there is with other organizations. I already mentioned with the UK, although that private was from, assigned to Europe, but using the internet, there's going to be cooperation. And what's interesting, there's cooperation between neo-Nazis and jihadists. They go out and shop for the right ideology that fits their, their motifs, if you will, what they want to believe in. So there's a danger of the internet. We could talk about that all day, but everyone in this audience understands that it's borderless. So we have seen, not we any longer, right? But the intelligence community has certainly seen cooperation. The Russian imperial movement is one example. There was cooperation with some U.S. Citizens, which means they'll be vulnerable to investigations by the Department of Justice and the FBI. So we'll see how all this plays out. But the short answer is yes. I don't know your thoughts on that, Doug.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that our adversaries know exactly what Chris just said. And they know that our adversaries pose a significant internal threat. They know where the seams are. They know where the collaboration is. They know where the advocacy, where the recruiting, and where the proselytization is. And they will work that hard. So the Russians will exploit everything that Chris said.
Yeah, and so this kind of is, you've sort of answered this, but people are asking about, Antifa and alt-right groups threatening our constitutional, our rights to exercise free speech and gathering, and are we in danger? You've sort of mentioned this, Doug, but foreign actors exploiting that, not just with neo-Nazis, but larger factions, almost anarchic factions.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chris could probably speak for the whole rest of the time we have on Antifa and some of the domestic violent political movements in the United States. But I think it is a threat that Director Wray and his bureau is watching very closely and very carefully, and is our first line of defense. And I might argue that the first line of defense before the first line of defense are the American citizens. For those who see something, say something, report it to local, state, federal law enforcement. It's really the eyes on the street. It's the collaboration and the trust between law enforcement and the American people that'll solve this problem.
And I think I'll just add on, Doug did a great job answering that, but the racially motivated violent extremists, REMV, that's the new term of art, means the US government is zeroing in on any organization that's going to commit violence, that any organization that is going to mobilize to hurt people in the United States. And they're looking for the nexus to foreign intelligence organizations or ties to people like Doug pointed out that want to exploit the polarization here in the United States. But another point I have to make, and I don't like making this point either, and I know that Director Wray has made this point previously, it is not against the law to be a neo-Nazi in the United States, as repugnant as it is. So there is a fine line between First Amendment rights and the line that you cross when you mobilize for committing violence. And it's the FBI, it's the Department of Justice that is looking, the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, to try to identify when somebody crosses those lines. And it happens on both, the far left and the far right, potentially. And again, we get away from that term because that's an alienating term anyway, and we focus on the term of art now, racially motivated violent extremists. Whatever motivates them, if they're going to commit violence, they'll be investigated.
So what is really nice about our Spy Chat audience is they really want to be involved, whether they're in the intelligence community or not. So this is a breadth of questions. We have a 13-year-old that wants to know what she should study to begin an intelligence career. We have private citizens who want to know what can they do. Someone said, I'm 68 years old and I want to help. So it's really nice. What any advice? So we've got lifelong learners wanting to know how to be involved or how to help.
Well, let me take a shot at that. Chris mentioned right off the bat the innovative and novel, and for the agency, a revolutionary recruitment business model. You know, the use of modern cinematographic and production tools and the use of social media, things that were antithetical to our culture, which were a very closed cycle ecosystem, and very legitimately so because of the counterintelligence threats. But whether you're 13 years old or whether you're 68 years old, I think, I don't want to write a check that the recruitment center has to cash here, but I think there's a place for you in CIA and in the intelligence community. So don't hesitate to reach out and respond and go through the process. In terms of what can you do to make yourself the most attractive? Well, it's quite frankly, be a good citizen, don't have an arrest record, be a good student in school, study international relations, international affairs, and anything related to that, speak a foreign language with a more than a fair amount of facility, and really take the step to engage with the agencies that you wish to join, whether it's the Federal Bureau of Investigation or whether it's the National Security Agency or anybody in between. The talent needs inside the IC is extraordinary. It needs every bit of talent, from a carpenter and electrician to somebody that can recruit a spy, to somebody who is deeply involved in computer language coding, to somebody like the Chris and I were, which were human clandestine operators during our career. And the diversity of needs, if you go on the website for each of the agencies, they spell out very clearly what is their need. I think anybody that has an interest, anybody that has a background that fits the needs and requirements of the intelligence community, I think there's a place for you to invest your patriotism, your dedication, and your professionalism in defense of America.
I really want to take the opportunity to address our 13-year-old friend. First of all, please share with your parents. I would love to host you at the Spy Museum. If your parents bring you here sometime, I'd like to meet you and show you some of our exhibits that really showcase the work that women do. And now, this wasn't set up deliberately, but over Doug's left-hand shoulder, there's a print of one of my favorite operators in intelligence history, and I didn't know the story. It's Virginia Hall, and it's an extraordinary story. So I want to pause there for a second, and I want to transition and tell you what I had an opportunity to do, because this will tie together Gina Haspel, and it will tie together your question. I was invited to attend a ceremony for Karen Schaefer, who's on our board. And Karen was leaving the CIA, and I was to go and be an audience while she thanked people for her tremendous service and received recognition for her quiet service at the CIA as a female officer, who I had incredible respect for. I had the opportunity to speak from the heart in front of Gina Haspel, and I had a chance to talk about Virginia Hall, that female operator in the picture, and how Karen embodied her at the same time with a little intimidation, right? You had Gina Haspel there, head of CIA, the first woman head of CIA. I had an opportunity to tell Gina Haspel that I thought Karen was emblematic, just like Haspel, of what we would expect a woman operator would do in this very, very tough business. So you have some big shoes to fill already, and from history and recent history, but I would encourage you to keep exploring. And I want to also say that if a Canadian called me and said, I want to go into the CSIS, the CSIS, I would encourage them to do the same thing, because I've worked with CSIS, and I have extraordinary respect for him. So there's a universal theme here, at least for the countries that are friendly toward the West, right? Serve in the intelligence community if you can, or explore it at least. So those are just some thoughts that I have. So see if your family will bring you to the Spy Museum, and we'll tell you more about the Virginia Hall story and show you some artifacts. But that's a great question. And thanks for
Yeah,
having that print in your office, Doug.
yeah, I think it's a great question. It's why I intentionally have Virginia Hall there, and she's illuminated. As a matter of fact, where everything else is quite dark. As I said in my opening remarks, the power and the majesty of the U.S. intelligence community isn't the funding that it has. It isn't the authorities statutorily and regulatorily that it has. It's really the talent and the magicians that make the magic. The magic doesn't make the magicians. The magicians make the magic. And so it is important that we get more magicians. And I would encourage anyone from 13 to 68, I would encourage all of you to express your
Hey,
interest
somebody's
by applying.
75. Somebody mentions they're 75. So,
Well, I was 70 years old when I was in the intelligence community.
So
I
yeah,
mean,
for our more experienced demographic, that's how I'm going to frame it. For those 68 and 70-year-olds, I would just say continue supporting going to the Spy Museum program and get the word out, because our mission, and I don't want to sound like a commercial here though, is to educate the community and do so in a responsible way on what it is that happens universally in this world of intelligence, which I think Doug has done an amazing job to contribute to today. Amanda,
and
can I
think,
make a comment before we move on?
go
Sorry, go
ahead.
ahead.
No,
I
I was just going to also suggest that, for those who, for whatever reason, choose not to go into government public service, there are a large part of the private sector that actually plays a powerful and enabling role for
right.
the protection of the United States of America and the American people. So, you don't have to work for CIA. You don't have to be the executive director of the Spy Museum. You don't have to be in any of the agencies of the IC to still make a significant and material contribution to the American people and to the nation as a whole. So apologize, Chris.
No, no worries. There was no good transition to I misspoke a little bit earlier. I think I said you were in the great state of Arizona. That's what our production staff told me here, which means a family member that's eavesdropping. And of course, you're in New Mexico, and we have a lot of friends in New Mexico that have supported the Spy Museum, and that's where Bodie Aviation is. So I misspoke. So my apologies to our New Mexican friends that I know are listening to us today and watching us.
Well, we share a
And
common border with Arizona, so you're
that's
not that.
right. And
all
also,
right.
Doug, we promised some people that you would make a reference to a baboon again, so you have to like tie that into our discussion today.
Well, it's kind of hard, but some people may remember that some time ago, a news reporting was an individual, and I think it was in New England, who believed that they could, in fact, domesticate what essentially is a genetically wild animal, and then was shocked to find out that the animal actually attacked them and tried to remove their face. And I don't remember whether the epilogue of that was that there was a extraordinary surgery to replace the lost face, and I think that worked out fairly well. But what John, Steve, Mark, and I tried to do in the article in the Washington Post, and we're very grateful for the Post to publish that, is the fact that the Russians aren't appreciably different than a wild animal as well. And so it should be no surprise to us that when we try to reach a modus vivendi with the Russians, that it comes with zero value and all risk to the United States of America. I realize that there are roles that we have to play diplomatically, and we have to have, a bilateral relationship with the Russian Federation on a range of issues, but intelligence isn't one of them, because the Russians have never been a good partner. They've always been a dangerous interlocutor and have used every opportunity that we've ever had to turn that against us and use it as a collection opportunity against the American people.
Doug, I was really struck when you said win-win for the Russians means they win both instances.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that underscores the point. I think that was John Cipher that was his quote, but it's very accurate. You know, win-win is they win and they win.
All right, well, I am very intrigued by the fact that we have gotten through almost an hour without bringing up a certain subject, but I think it's fitting that our last question, which came in a bit ago, is how do you think the intelligence community has adjusted during the COVID-19 pandemic? I think it's the longest we've gone without mentioning the pandemic in a while.
Well, I think I think the intelligence community, like other aspects of American society and American cities and towns and governments, were significantly impacted. I think what I'm most proud of, as I said in my opening remarks, was, because I know CIA so well, you know, I don't mean to not attribute what I'm about to say to the other leadership teams of the IC. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, the hallmark of the business model of the US intelligence community is cooperation and collaboration. And what's the first thing that was hemorrhaged and damaged and abridged by the virus was our ability to be in a room, to share ideas, to exploit that diversity that I mentioned. The diversity in ethnicity, the diversity in gender, the diversity in experience, all of that had to be re-engineered. I'm exceptionally proud. I don't know the details, and if I did, I wouldn't be able to share them. But in general terms, I'm very pleased and proud that the leadership of the US intelligence community has been agile and has adapted extraordinarily well and has really kept the eye on the ball, which were two things: the safety and security of the American people and providing critical, truthful, powerful, non-public intelligence to the policymakers of the United States, and also the safety and security of the intelligence community workforce. I think they came up with structures, business models, workarounds. And if you talk about the fact that it's not easy to work from home when you're dealing in a highly classified environment, there were unique challenges imposed by the virus on the US intelligence community. So I think the American people should be exceptionally pleased that the IC didn't miss a beat. I think they continued to drive on and provide exactly what the taxpayer wants them to do: hard-hitting, high-impact, truthful intelligence to people like who replaced Chris Costa on the National Security Council staff.
You want to add anything, Chris, about?
No, I couldn't add anything more than what Doug just said, which was a great articulation.
Well, I want to thank you both for this terrific conversation, and I want the folks who are listening to know we will do our best. We'll send the comments, their personal notes. There's a really nice commentary. We will be sending those to Chris and to Doug to look at afterward. Your questions were great. If we didn't get to them, it's just because there are so many questions and they were all so good. Thank you for your incredible insight. And we got to thank Bodie Aviation, really appreciate their support. It's so exciting to make this free, and that's why the 13-year-old and the 78-year-old and everyone in between and older, and there's a 5-year-old who apparently now wants a birthday party because of Spy Chat. So this is wild stuff. So thank you, Bodie Aviation, truly remarkable support. I want to say we will have another Spy Chat. Our next one will be on Thursday, August 20th with Kristen Wood, who will be on board, another one of our advisory board members. She's terrific, has had an extensive and cool career. And if you're looking for something a little bit lighter, next Thursday on the 23rd of July at 5:30, we'll be looking at Hollywood spies, and we'll have Jana Mendez, a real spy who has some cool Hollywood connections, will be joining us as well. So Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Doug. And thank you, audience, for joining us. And everyone stay well.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. It was an honor. Appreciate it. Thanks, John Bodie.
Yes.